November 5, 1956, Studio 6B, NBC Television, Burbank, California, 7:28 p.m. Pacific Time. Nat King Cole stood behind the heavy velvet curtain in the wings, listening to the orchestra warm up. The brass section ran through their scales. The drummer tapped out a rhythm. Through the fabric, he could hear the audience settling into their seats, the rustle of programs, the murmur of conversation, the anticipation building. In 90 seconds, he would walk onto that stage and make history. Not as a singer, he'd already done that with hits like Mona Lisa and Unforgettable. Not as a recording artist, he'd conquered that years ago, becoming one of Capitol Records' biggest stars. Tonight, he would become the first black entertainer to host his own national television variety show. His name in the title, his face opening the program, his voice welcoming America into their living rooms every Tuesday night. The weight of that first was enormous. Nat felt it in his chest, in the slight tremor in his hands that he controlled by pressing them flat against his sides. He'd performed for presidents, played the biggest venues in the world, recorded dozens of albums. But this was different. This wasn't just about him. This was about proving something that had never been proven before, that a black man could be the host, not just the entertainment, the star, not just the guest. The studio audience was filling in, 300 seats, mostly full, a good sign. NBC executives stood in the control booth above, watching monitors showing different camera angles. The director, a veteran named Jack Philbin, counted down through his headset. Stage crew made final adjustments to the lighting. Orchestra conductor Nelson Riddle looked over his shoulder at Nat and gave an encouraging nod. Nat adjusted his tie one final time, black tie, white dinner jacket, perfectly tailored to give him that elegant yet relaxed look that had become his signature. He took a breath, deeper than usual, centering himself. Then he stepped through the curtain into the lights. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth and warm. "I'm Nat King Cole, and this is our show." The applause was genuine. The camera work was flawless. The musical numbers, featuring guests like the Count Basie Orchestra, were spectacular. Nat's hosting was natural, effortless, exactly what NBC had hoped for when they'd signed him 6 months earlier. What nobody in that studio knew, not the audience, not even Nat himself, was that within 12 weeks, major sponsors would begin abandoning the show, that NBC would stop paying him for some episodes, that he would face a choice between walking away from television history or working for free to prove a point, and that he would choose to work for free, again and again, for 39 episodes, before we dive into the story of how Nat King Cole fought the most expensive battle of his career, losing thousands of dollars to keep a TV show on air that sponsors wouldn't touch. Let me ask, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because this story about doing important work even when nobody will pay you for it matters just as much today as it did in 1956. The idea for the show had started 18 months earlier, in spring 1955. NBC wanted to compete with Ed Sullivan on CBS. Someone suggested Nat King Cole. The suggestion was radical. There had never been a black host of a national variety show. Black performers appeared as guests, but hosting meant being the face of the show. That meant power, visibility, representation in a way American television had never allowed. NBC executives debated for months. The talent argument was easy. Nat was one of the biggest recording stars in America. The commercial argument was harder. Would sponsors support a black host? Would Southern affiliates air the show? "We'll never know unless we try," one executive finally said. NBC offered Nat a contract, 15 minutes Tuesday nights at 7:30 p.m. starting November 1956. Nat signed immediately. This was bigger than another contract. This was cultural territory. When the news broke, the response was divided. Trade publications ran headlines, "Cole makes TV history." The black press celebrated it. Breakthrough, but NBC started receiving letters, hundreds of them, from Southern viewers threatening they would not watch a show hosted by a black man, and they would pressure any sponsor who supported it. The first sponsor to sign on was Rheingold Beer, a New York-based brewery. They committed to 13 weeks, starting in November. NBC breathed easier. With Rheingold backing the show, other sponsors would likely follow. The show premiered on November 5, 1956. The reviews were excellent. "Nat King Cole brings his considerable charm and talent to television," wrote the New York Times. "A natural host with impeccable musical taste." The ratings were solid, not spectacular, but respectable for a new show in a tough time slot. NBC ordered more episodes. Everything looked promising. Then in week 4, Rheingold pulled out. Call came on a Wednesday morning. Nat was at home in Hancock Park when his manager phoned with the news. Reingold is withdrawing their sponsorship, the manager said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Effective immediately. What's their reason? Nat asked, though he already suspected. Officially, strategic reallocation of advertising budget. Unofficially, I spoke with their marketing director off the record. They're getting hammered by their southern distributors. Bars and retailers in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, they're threatening to stop carrying Reingold beer if the company continues to sponsor a show hosted by a Negro. Nat was quiet for a long moment, processing. The show had been on air for less than a month. The reviews were excellent. The ratings were solid. None of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the color of his skin and the southern market's refusal to accept it. They signed for 13 weeks, Nat said. We've done 4. They're paying out the contract. That's not the issue. The issue is what this signals to other potential sponsors. If Reingold, a New York company, relatively progressive, can't withstand the pressure, who will? That was the real problem. Reingold backing out sent a message to every other advertiser. Sponsoring a black host means Southern backlash. It means lost business. It means controversy. And in 1956, controversy wasn't worth the risk, no matter how talented the host. NBC scrambled for a replacement. They approached major brands over the following weeks: cigarette companies like Lucky Strike and Chesterfield, car manufacturers like Chevrolet and Ford, soap producers like Procter and Gamble, the typical TV sponsors of the era. The network sales team had compelling data. Ratings were good. Viewer demographics were strong. The show's production quality was excellent. Guest stars were first-rate. Everyone said no, not directly citing race, of course. That would be too explicit, too legally questionable. Instead, they said things like, "We don't think our customer base would respond well to this format. Our southern affiliates have expressed concerns. We're going in a different direction with our advertising strategy." Translation: Madison Avenue was afraid of southern boycotts, afraid of controversy, afraid of being the first major national brand to back a black host and facing whatever backlash that might bring. By January 1957, the Nat King Cole Show was airing without a national sponsor. NBC was funding it directly, hoping that ratings would eventually attract advertisers. But that couldn't continue indefinitely. Without sponsor money, the network was losing money on every episode. That's when the conversation happened. Nat was called into a meeting with NBC programming executives in February 1957. They laid out the situation bluntly. "We love the show. The quality is excellent, but we can't secure sponsorship. We're losing money. We need to either find sponsors or cancel. How much time do I have?" Nat asked. "We can give you through spring, maybe early summer, but without sponsors, we'll have to reduce the budget, which means we'll have to reduce your fee." Nat understood what they were really saying. They were asking him to take a pay cut, to work for less money, possibly for free some weeks, to keep the show alive. While they searched for sponsors willing to take the risk, most performers would have walked away. It was a losing proposition financially. Why work for reduced pay or no pay on a show that might get canceled anyway? But Nat saw something NBC executives didn't. He saw that canceling the show would send a message. Black hosts weren't viable on national television. It would close a door that had barely opened. It would prove the racists right. "I'll take whatever you can pay," Nat said. "Even if some weeks that's nothing, keep the show on air. We'll find sponsors." The NBC executives looked at each other, surprised. "You understand what you're agreeing to? Some episodes, we literally won't be able to pay you your full fee. Some weeks, maybe nothing at all." "I understand," Nat said. "This isn't about the money anymore. This is about proving it can be done." From February through December 1957, Nat hosted episodes of his show for drastically reduced pay. Some weeks NBC paid him a token amount. Some weeks they paid him nothing at all. He showed up anyway, not because he didn't need the money, he did. He had a family to support, a lifestyle to maintain, expenses that didn't disappear just because his TV income did. But he also had something more valuable than any single paycheck: a chance to prove that a black man could host a successful television show, if only the industry would give him a real chance. Maria Cole watched her husband leave for NBC Studios every Tuesday, knowing he wasn't getting paid. She did the household budget, saw the gap where his TV income should have been. She sat at their dining room table with checkbooks and bills spread out before her, calculating what they could afford and what they couldn't. The math was concerning. Nat's recording career was still strong. He had hit albums, steady royalties. His live performances brought in good money, but the TV show had been factored into their budget. They'd planned on that income. Without it, things were tighter than they'd been in years. "How long can we sustain this?" she asked him one evening in April 1957. They were in their bedroom, Nat packing his overnight bag for a performance in San Francisco. Maria sat on the edge of the bed, watching him fold shirts with the precise care he brought to everything. "As long as it takes," Nat replied, not looking up from his packing. "This isn't just about us. This is about every black performer who comes after me. If I walk away, the door closes. If I stay, maybe it stays open long enough for someone else to walk through. But we have bills," Maria said, her voice gentle but firm. "We have Natalie's education to think about, the mortgage on this house, the house we fought so hard to live in. You can't work for free forever, Nat. That's not sustainable." Nat finally looked at her. "I'm not working for free. I'm making an investment in something bigger than one show, bigger than one paycheck. An investment in what? A show that's going to be canceled anyway. NBC has all but told you they're pulling the plug. An investment in possibility," Nat said quietly. "In proof, right now Madison Avenue thinks a black host can't work. If I walk away, I prove them right. If I stay, if I keep showing up and doing excellent work week after week, then when they cancel the show, it won't be because I failed. It'll be because they failed, and that's a different story. That's a story that leaves the door open." Maria was quiet for a long moment. "I support what you're doing," she finally said. "You know I do, but I'm also terrified. What if this breaks us financially? What if we can't recover? Then we rebuild, but we rebuild with our dignity intact, with proof that we tried." Maria didn't argue further. She believed in what he was doing, even as she worried about their finances. She'd married a man of principle, and principles sometimes cost money. But the strain was real. She saw it in the way Nat's shoulders were slightly more tense these days, in the way he studied the budget spreadsheets she prepared each month, his jaw tight as he saw the gap widening, in the way he took every live performance offer that came in, no matter how exhausting the schedule, to make up for the lost TV income. He was working without compensation on the show, while his recording career and live performances continued to demand time and energy. He was stretched thin financially and physically, but he refused to bend. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, NBC continued approaching sponsors. They had a strong pitch, good ratings, excellent reviews, a proven star, but the answer was always the same. Not quite a direct no because he's black, but close enough. "We don't think our customer base would respond well. Our southern affiliates have concerns. We're going in a different direction." Translation: Madison Avenue was afraid of southern boycotts, afraid of controversy, afraid of being the first to back a black host and facing backlash. The show itself remained excellent. Nat booked incredible guests: Tony Bennett, Ella Fitzgerald, Peggy Lee, Harry Belafonte. The musical performances were top tier. Critics consistently praised it, but praise doesn't pay production costs. By summer 1957, NBC was ready to cancel. They'd given it almost a year. They'd tried everything to secure sponsorship. Nothing worked. The decision was made. The Nat King Cole show would end in December. When Nat learned the news, he called a press conference. On July 15, 1957, he stood before reporters and spoke honestly about why his show was being canceled. "Madison Avenue is afraid of the dark," he said. The quote made headlines immediately. "It's that simple. The show is good. The ratings are respectable. The reviews are positive. But we can't get a sponsor because I'm black." They're not afraid of bad television. They're afraid of supporting a Negro. The bluntness shocked people. TV stars didn't typically criticize the industry so directly. But Nat was done being diplomatic. He'd worked for reduced pay and no pay for months. He'd proven the show could work, and he was watching it die anyway, not because of quality, but because of cowardice. The press conference made national news. Suddenly, the cancellation wasn't just an industry story, it was a civil rights story. The show's failure to secure sponsorship became evidence of systemic racism in broadcasting. Some sponsors reached out after the press conference, embarrassed by the publicity, but the offers were half-hearted, short-term, not enough to save the show. NBC had already made their decision. The Nat King Cole show aired its final episode on December 17, 1957, 39 total episodes. No national sponsor. Nat had worked on many of those episodes for drastically reduced pay or nothing at all, simply to keep the show on air as long as possible. In his closing remarks on the final episode, Nat thanked the viewers, the guests, the crew. He didn't mention the sponsors who'd abandoned him or the industry that had failed to support him. He stayed classy even in defeat, but privately he was angry. Not at NBC, they'd tried, not even at the sponsors, really. He was angry at the system, at the fear, at the fact that in 1957 America, talent and quality still weren't enough to overcome the color line. The immediate aftermath looked like failure. The show was canceled. Nat had lost significant income. The first black-hosted variety show on national television had ended after just over a year, but something else happened. Something quieter but more important. Other black performers saw what Nat had done. They saw that he'd fought for a year to keep that show on air, that he'd worked without pay rather than let it die quietly, that he'd called out the industry's racism publicly. And they learned that the door, while closed, wasn't locked. In the early 1960s, as the civil rights movement gained momentum, television slowly began changing. Networks became slightly more willing to take risks on black-led programming. In 1968, 11 years after Nat's show was canceled, NBC launched The Flip Wilson Show, hosted by comedian Flip Wilson. It became a massive hit, fully sponsored and nationally supported. Flip Wilson acknowledged the debt. Nat King Cole opened that door, he said, made it possible for the rest of us. By the 1970s, black-hosted variety shows weren't unusual anymore. The fear that had killed Nat's show had dissipated, not because society had suddenly changed, but because performers like Nat had proven the commercial viability. That was Nat's real legacy from those 39 episodes, not the show itself, which was canceled, but the precedent, the proof that it was possible. The crack in the wall that later performers could widen into an opening. Looking back now, those unpaid episodes stand out. Nat could have walked away in February 1957 when NBC told him they couldn't pay him properly. Nobody would have blamed him. Instead, he showed up, week after week, sometimes for reduced pay, sometimes for nothing, because he understood that some battles are worth fighting even when you can't win them in the traditional sense. He lost money, he lost the show, but he won. Something more valuable, he proved the concept. He demonstrated that the failure wasn't in the host or content, but in the industry's courage. 39 episodes, many done for little or no pay, all of them part of a larger fight that Nat Cole knew he was fighting, even as he sang and smiled for the cameras. Madison Avenue had been afraid of the dark, but Nat turned on the lights anyway, and eventually the rest of television had no choice but to see what he'd illuminated.